Mr. Walton, did you make contact with aliens? Were you taken to another planet, to a mothership? How did they communicate with... Can you tell me what they look like? Can you tell me how many of them there were? Were you given food?
But the teachers are alive. They're not books. They are the very living essences of nature itself.
What a strange person.
Unbelievably powerful supercomputer that's running our reality, and we don't have a clue as to how to operate it.
So when maybe you or somebody else creates an AGI system and you get to ask her one question, what would that question be?
What's outside the simulation?
Say in your mind, say to yourself, I am more than my physical body, because I am more than physical matter. I can perceive that which is greater than the physical world.
Do not know all the answers to the questions about reality. Do not claim to know the ultimate truth about life. I seek that which has been made hidden. As a part of a family and explorers of consciousness. I'm the void one.
This is your last chance. After this, there is no turning back. You take the blue pill. The story ends. You wake up in your bed and believe whatever you want to believe. You take the red pill. You stay in Wonderland. And I show you how deep the rabbit hole goes.
Welcome to Lighting the Void.
Broadcasting from a shack on a hill in the mossy creek bottoms of Cane Creek, Arkansas. This is Lighting the Void, and we are live on the Fringe FM. I want to thank Harris for coming out Monday night. That was awesome. Awesome show. I could probably listen to that show a million times. Anthony Tyler's our guest tonight. We're going to be talking about all of his theories. Now, Anthony is a researcher from Anchorage, Alaska, who's into evolutionary psychology. We're going to get into Fortean phenomena, all kinds of cool stuff. Had a really cool interview on Aeon Byte Gnostic Radio, and we're a big fan of them, so that's coming up shortly. We want to give a shout out to our sponsors at GetTheTea.com, AncientLifeOil.com, and Metaphysical Archaeology. If you've had a paranormal experience that has caused you trauma or post-traumatic stress, that's who you want to call. 214, I almost got that memorized. 214-995-3754. The phones are still down. I'm still working on that. So if you want to call in tonight, that number is 501-777-5631, 501-777-5631. And you can also log into the Fringe FM Discord server by going to thefringe.fm/Discord. And then if you're into ufology, I'll say it every night, ufoseekers.com. That's all you need to know. Backed and supported by the Fringe FM and Lighting the Void. So if you want to keep a journalistic approach to what's going on in that field, that's who you need to follow at UFO Seekers on Twitter. We don't really have any announcements other than I want to thank the new patrons for signing up, and we'll be getting that content out shortly as well. I got some surprise stuff for you guys that might be a little funny. It may not. It may be a train wreck. Who knows? But that's what that's for. So if you sign up to the Patreon, you're going to get access to the Astral Journal, Outside the Shack podcast, all the tarot and astrological readings, and any behind-the-scenes content there as well. All right, so make sure you sign up to that. There's a ton of packages there, too. So Anthony Tyler's here with us, and he's a researcher and author from Anchorage, Alaska, and his work can be described as evolutionary psychology that deals heavily with mechanics of classical mysticism, often bleeding into folklore and Fortean phenomena. He was also a researcher, writer, and one of the three developers of the nonpartisan news website, The Last American Vagabond, positions he relinquished in order to write his latest book, Dive Manual, Empirical Investigations of Mysticism. Welcome to the program, man. It's good to have you on here.
Hey, yeah, pleasure to be here. Thank you very much for having me on.
Yeah, it is cool. Like, I heard your talk on Aeon Byte, and I got to say, man, I was listening to you. I think it was another interview. I can't remember what show it was on, but I follow Miguel, so I like his show. And you were talking about, the divine feminine, which is something I like to look into myself, because I think it's, to be honest with you, like the divine feminine and divine masculine, the what we've been taught about these energies, to me, is just totally wrong. Like, because it doesn't line up with our natural, how we are. That's why everything's so messed up and we're always so psychologically screwed up, whether it's relationship, sexuality, or just trying to make our way in the workforce and in the world. I mean, everything's just jacked up, man. But I think we're starting to like really understand these energies and stuff. So that was pretty cool. I thought you were spot on with that stuff, man.
I appreciate it. Yeah, I mean, there's it's easy for this information, my research and the dive manual, the book, to be labeled at like a passerby glance as New Age, maybe even like strictly esotericism, but it's really neither. If anything, I mean, you did hit the nail on the head. It's evolutionary psychology, and it's deals a lot with mysticism being more so focused, like as a definition, on states of consciousness, and like esotericism being more so the rites and ceremonies and traditions behind these things. So there's certainly plenty of both in there, but I really respect tradition, and I found a lot of use out of Hermeticism and Buddhism, and I mean, I was raised Christian, so I definitely appreciate tradition, but dogmatism, as it's become defined today, is something I find problematic, and that's kind of something that I seek to address a lot in the book, among many other things. But I especially, not to dog on anybody, but I find the religious perspective in general, although I do respect it, it's tiresome in the sense of always squabbling over who's right and wrong. And that's not really what mysticism is about. Mysticism is about this comparative approach to religion, especially, complemented by the sciences. And it's a look at the experience itself. It's existentialism at its finest, really. So, a lot of my research is, very Jungian. Jung is definitely a heavy inspiration of mine, and we're looking at like biological correlates of what you could call the mystical experience, which is this, something that people can see in brain scans today. It's activating different parts of the brain, and it's essentially your brain communicating with itself on different levels, through hypnotic mechanisms and trance states and whatnot. So it's a very tangible thing, and it's not like some sort of high magic secret. It's just simply the matter of self-analysis at its depth. Taking self-analysis to the extreme is one way to put it, I guess.
Yeah, I tend to do that myself too. Like I do that, but that's what you're supposed to do, man. Like, I feel like if you're not growing mentally, spiritually, hell, emotionally. When I look at Hermetics, you're talking about Hermetics, right? So I look at Hermetics probably in more of a Western traditional sense, where I look at the elements, and I feel like I need to be growing all those elements all the time. Now, I don't necessarily say I grow them out balanced, because I definitely don't. But, like what I found in my life is that as I'm trying to grow this stuff, it affects other people that are in my life too. That's when you really start becoming self-aware. It's like, damn, like, what am I doing to these people that I care about? You know what I mean? Trying to grow myself. And that's when you really start getting up there, because the big demons start coming out,
Yeah. The more you start to realize or be able to notice that what Jung would call that projection process of the psyche, the more you're going to encounter the shadow, for sure. And, see, I like Jung because he puts definitions onto things I mean, he was one of the first guys to really. There are others as well, but Jung was really the godfather of this stuff. Just setting aside for a moment whether or not all these metaphysics and gods and goddesses, angels, demons, whether or not any of this exists, let's set it aside for a moment and let's look at how this affected our culture and society as we know it, not just today, but on an evolutionary scale. And when you kind of see the question is not often framed like that. Everyone's just always squabbling over the quote unquote reality of metaphysics instead of looking at the tangible human experience that is, I mean, it's really the crux of the whole thing. Like you think about it more and more, you know, why would humans be doing this to begin with? If adaptation in the whole evolutionary scale is something that we're agreeing upon scientifically, then you know, there's no waste in nature. There has to be some sort of reason for the things. For you know, regardless of religion, there's all these archetypal components and rights and compulsions that we have as human beings, and the reason for that ultimately is because we have, for whatever reason, we have needs and drives and instincts that are oftentimes not readily met by our environment. They're not reciprocated. We can't find the things we need in our environment. I mean, that's how so much of the human existence is. And so what you do is, I mean, this is the classic case with dreams. This is what dreams are doing essentially, is you're finding you know, you're finding pieces of the environment, your sensory experience, and you're relating it to different you know, different concepts, mental mechanisms, dilemmas, or you know, potential betterment. You're relating it to these things in the psyche that aren't readily available. I mean, that's what projection is. Like, we're constantly flowing out these things, projecting our ideas onto things, and that's, you know, it takes a certain amount of discipline that every single person on earth could continue to work on to be able to guide that sort of projection process more and more, or at least be, you know, or at least notice it to begin with. Not an easy thing necessarily.
No, what it really sucks is when you do it to somebody you care about, whether that's your children, your better half, or you don't notice it until you start doing it to people that you care about.
Yeah, absolutely.
And especially, like, a lot of the times, if you ever run into somebody in your life, whether it's friend or family member or somebody that you really relate to, you start mirroring projections, and you're like, whoa, you know, what the hell's going on? And so there's something to like this thing where when they talk about vibration that I know exists, because you vibrate certain things, people, situations, and stuff into your life that force you to grow, that force you to see yourself, you know.
Absolutely.
Which is sad to me, because it's like, are we just using people for stepping stones, or you know what I mean? Like, I don't know.
Yeah, well, that's how LaVey saw it. Anton LaVey. I mean, that's definitely a cornerstone of the whole atheistic Satanist philosophy. And you know, I mean, if you're a realist, I mean, there's definitely, in some sense, that's part of it. But you know, I think what mysticism entails, the more you look into it, and just kind of existentialism as a philosophical outlook in general, is that the more you know, it's a feedback loop with you and the environment. The more you work on yourself, the more you'll notice, you know, how well or poorly you are engaging with life by the reactions of other people oftentimes. And you know, if you're doing well, you know, you know, in a sense, you got to help yourself before you help others. But once you do help yourself, you know, then you can seriously benefit through the projections. I mean, it's not an entirely negative process by any stretch. And
how does the Fortean stuff? That's where because I'm a big Charles Fort fan, right? But how does this meld into your life study, the Fortean thing?
That's a great question. Yeah, there's a whole cornucopia we could open there. So, see, the more you come across, the more I study, which, evolutionary psychology and esotericism, comparative religion, the more there's just this pervasive question of, what is real and what is not, in the sense of, more to the point, what is sentient and what is not, because there's a difference between autonomy and sentience. Autonomy being just some sort of system, some self-reinforced system, but sentience being, lights on the other side, like an actual cognitive process. So even Jung thought that, for instance, the archetypes were autonomous, clearly, and that's something that even Richard Dawkins talks about with memetics. It's not a very controversial theory, but no one can ever pinpoint whether or not these things are sentient. And but the more you look into it, and believe me, this will definitely segue into cryptozoology and everything else. You see, the more you look into it, the more you see that. Well, I mean, Jung himself even wrote his, I don't know, it's like 100 pages or so, I believe, consideration of UFO phenomena and the projection process. And he wasn't even necessarily trying to explain away ufology. He took a little bit of time throughout the work to explain that he was open to things, and that the mechanics he was proposing weren't necessarily even opposed to the phenomena itself. And in this respect, he has a very like John Keelian sort of perspective. This idea that there's a suggestibility with the phenomena, just like with these archetypes of the mind and how they're biologically reflected in our psyche. Take for instance sleep paralysis, how it's this modern science shows us that sleep paralysis, despite is terrifying regardless of the science. I have minimal experience with it, but I've talked to many people who have experienced it, and it's it's essentially a hijack of the mirror neurons. When you're at this point, you're at this state in your sleep process, and you're no longer there's no actual neurological input that's coming from your body. These parts of your brain are shutting down, but there's a jam in the system, so to speak, and you start projecting your body in a different space, essentially. But that doesn't account for the autonomy and the horrific nature of these things oftentimes. And it's the same with the UFO process. I mean, it's this projection process is one of the foundations of our cognitive experience, and it is the foundation of culture and society as we know it. So, I mean, of course, these things, and you see ufology, whether it's called like flying saucers or not. I mean, you see that, the chariots of the gods all throughout history too. So, I mean, the way I see it is ufology and mythology, cryptozoology. I mean, it's all pretty interrelated, and we've only continued, or the further we've advanced in modern society, the more we've just kind of like divided these things into specific fields of study, which is fine. There's no problem with that, but people often forget how inherently related they all are. I mean, like even me, I've seen some wild stuff in the sky in Alaska, right outside of Anchorage, near the Chugach mountain range. There's a lot of people I know who have seen some pretty weird stuff out there. I don't know what I think about.
What'd you see? What did you see?
Yeah, okay, let's get into it. So there were several sightings actually, and I'll give you a couple quick highlights. So there's one time I was by myself, and I was sober, and I saw this triangular craft come in right over the tree line. I was in my backyard overlooking the wilderness a little bit, and it was a dark, silent triangle, and it hovered just right above the rooftops, and it had a little but bright white light on it, and it was like a red light on one wing and a blue light on the other. So it almost made me second guess and wonder if I was looking at my vision was all screwed up and I was looking at a plane, but the lights weren't quite right, even though they were similar. And this thing was literally right above the rooftops. This was like 3 a.m. or something. So I followed this down the street. It didn't make a single sound, and I watched it disappear over the mountain range. And there were some other times I was with people who saw similar things. It was never that close, but we could make out the shape. I saw things do 90-degree turns in the sky, flying faster than a shooting star.
Alaska's got a badass night sky, though, don't it? I mean,
ooh, yeah,
like
sure
one of
does.
the best.
Yeah, it's pretty breathtaking out there. And so in the long run, there were some other sightings too. We saw one once on the side of the road, and it was strange because it would blink and it would light up like the whole tree line on the side of the road, because we were driving on the road in a neighborhood, but it's Alaska, so it's essentially the wilderness. So it's lighting up this whole tree line just for like a second, and then darkness again. And we watched that for a while until that also disappeared, and that was also a triangle. It was the same type of craft. So I don't know if it's ETs in the long run. I'm definitely not. I'm not a naysayer when it comes to the full-blooded extraterrestrials and mechanical crafts, but when you look at but for the Alaska sightings, if gun to my head, I'd say probably experimental government tech of some kind, but I don't know. And if we're talking in the grand scheme about aliens, the flesh and blood in general, there's definitely clearly something out there. I don't really have a specific opinion personally on whether or not they're visiting us. I mean, they definitely could be likely. But
you haven't had any encounters, right? Bigfoot, nothing like that.
No, just UFO sightings. So I keep a healthy skepticism, but I mean, with all the people that, and I will say this, ufology and its intermingling with former military officials of all kinds, that always makes me a little squeamish. But in terms of the actual individuals, the people experiencing the sightings and stuff, I give that credit where it's due. I don't think that people are just full of crap, so there's something going on.
Yeah, there's way too many of them. And, the Travis Walton case, I mean, right. I don't know if there's been a case that's as good since that one that's got me convinced as good as that one does. But
well, and here's the thing is, this is certainly theoretical, but given all the projection process, mirror neurons, everything we talked about so far, and this is actually something reflected in mythology in several instances, where it seems very possible that these things become so, I don't know, altered states of consciousness, and us projecting these things in these ways, it could be becoming transphysical in some way. And if it's not, then our consciousness, our perceptibility is so malleable. These things could be, for all intents and purposes, flesh and blood and mechanical. But on that level, who's to say what's tangibly real and what's not? I don't think that all of this is extremely straightforward. If we're really just just having a chill conversation and spitting a little bit of conjecture, I'm more inclined to think of different dimensions than I am different planets. But I could be wrong about that for sure.
No, and based on what I know about astral travel and what I've experienced it with myself and consciousness exploration and these ancient studies of Pythagorean metaphysics and the Merkaba and all of the geometry and the Kabbalistic stuff that's buried inside all these texts, to me, it's definitely an interdimensional type thing. It's got to be.
Absolutely. Yeah, you hit the nail on the head. I would agree with that 100%. This is something I like to bring up because I'm honestly surprised at how few people are familiar with the research and the anecdote. But the famous neuroscientist V.S. Ramachandran, he wrote the book Phantoms in the Brain, came out like 99 or 2000. And it was all about abnormal psychology that was almost always dealing with some sort of religious metaphysical phenomena of some kind, in the sense of A couple, I could go on a list, but a couple choice examples that will probably come up in our conversation later: temporal lobe epilepsy, and then phantom limb syndrome. He talks about all the how with epilepsy specifically related to the temporal lobe, there's all sorts of, by the nature of the seizure itself, religious visions and all this metaphysical phenomena that you're experiencing in the seizure, and phantom limb syndrome, where even if you were born without a limb to begin with, you can still experience this phantom limb pain where you feel neurologically as if your arm is still there. And so Ramachandran, and he tested this. He did control methods, and he did this on many different patients once he figured this out, and he found it worked on the vast majority, but not every single patient. So take a missing limb, he would essentially reflect the person's still intact limb into the spot through a series of angled mirrors. He would reflect the intact limb onto the spot where the person's limb was missing, causing a little trick of the eye, as if they had both their hands. And he found that all the neurological tension, it was a complete seamless fit. And a person, when they wiggled their real hand, and it looked as if their other hand was wiggling, they really felt the movement. It's a very, very interesting trick of the brain. And not only did this work to this extent, but he had patients go home and practice with this mirror box. And there's one anecdote of a man who practiced for long enough, and he felt his phantom limb start to shrink over time, like reps at a gym. And he said that by the end of it, he just felt little shadow fingers coming out of his shoulder.
What?
And he told the doctor, he's like, I can't fit the angles anymore, so I can't get rid of the fingers. But I'll tell you what, the finger pain is way better than a full phantom limb. So thanks, Doc.
Fingers coming out of the shoulders. That's pretty trippy. All right.
Really.
Well, yeah, that's some stuff off the Twilight Zone right there for sure. Look, we'll be right back. Anthony Tyler at our first break. Stay with us. More Lighting the Void coming up.
This is Crow 777, and you are listening to The Fringe FM.
Hey, this is country music singer and void walker Jason Benoit, and when I need my fix on the world of magic and the capabilities of the human consciousness, I listen to Joe Roop right here on Lighting the Void Radio.
This portion of the show is being brought to you by Ed's Discount Hospital, the only hospital in the country to receive a 4-star rating from the National Association of Undertakers. Be sure to ask about Ed's famous 39-cent BYOA appendectomy. BYOA, that's Bring Your Own Anesthetic.
From a cave in the depths of your mind, it's Lighting the Void with Joe Roop.
Okay, here we go. AncientLifeOil.com. AncientLifeOil.com. Now, this is for CBD. AncientLifeOil.com. Again, for CBD. Where do I get CBD? AncientLifeOil.com. It's pretty good stuff. Organic, non-GMO. We are the Ferrari of CBDs. AncientLifeOil.com. They say when you mention a person's name 3 times when you first meet, that you're going to remember. So I'd say to you, nice to meet you, AncientLifeOil.com. It's AncientLifeOil.com, right? Nice to know that you help people. AncientLifeOil.com. Think about this. Occasional stress, occasional anxiety, occasional inflammation, occasional stiffness, and intruders that get you down. AncientLifeOil.com. Okay, so I'm going to give you a fact for the day. So Ancient Life Oil does not help you with business deals. Hold on a second. If you feel better, it could help you make a better decision. Okay, I'm wrong. Just remember to go to ancientlifeoil.com.
Have you suffered in silence or experienced stress from a paranormal experience? Even if it happened 20 years ago, when thinking or talking about it today still makes you feel sick to your stomach or makes your heart beat faster, or you suddenly can't breathe. Maybe you even feel those old familiar signs of a panic attack trying to reach the surface. You could have unprocessed emotional responses. Those reactions of terror and trauma are no different than living through a horrible assault, childhood abuse, or a terrible car accident. It can be nearly impossible to find help. The very instance of seeing a ghost or encountering a cryptid could be clinically described as seeing or hearing things that aren't there. You could be considered psychotic, or at best, you're just not taken seriously. Out of a growing mountain of research, the National Institute for Integrative Healthcare showed that 8 out of 10 veterans who completed just 6 one-hour EFT sessions no longer tested positive for PTSD. If you've had paranormal trauma, you can contact Metaphorical Archaeology by calling 214-995-3754. Again, that's 214-995-3754 for a discreet consultation.
This portion of the show is being brought to you by Soft and Gooey, the all-new store-bought cookies that are so soft, you have to eat them with a straw.
The Fringe FM isn't just a radio station. We also provide services for all your audio production needs. If you are interested in live radio or pre-recorded podcasts, we're here to help. We even do audio enhancements and voiceovers if needed. If you want to do a podcast or live radio show and even want the option to syndicate on terrestrial radio, from simple audio file enhancement to live production and call screening, we have you covered. We have worked with some of the best professionals in the business in order to provide coaching instruction for content creation, show structure, and more. Contact The Fringe Digital Media for more at info@thefringe.fm. That's info@thefringe.fm, or call 501-777-5631 for a consultation.
Hey, I'm J.M. DeBoard, and when I want to talk about dreams, I look up my man Joe Root and his show, Lighting the Void.
All right, welcome back to Lighting the Void. Our guest tonight, Anthony Tyler, author and pretty badass dude all the way around. When did this book come out? When did this book actually come out? The name of the book?
The Dive Manual came out in February.
The Dive Manual. Damn, that is a cool name for a book, man.
Thank you.
Yeah. So have you had like any through your metaphysical journeys? Have you had any metaphysical, I want to say not paranormal experiences, any type of out-of-body stuff, any type of enlightenment experiences, oneness, anything like that? Or has it all just been kind of mental enlightenment?
No, I've definitely had some pretty tangible experiences, so to speak. I could definitely get into them a little bit. So it started out with dreams. And Jung touches on this quite a bit, just the overall relevance of dreams and how, the unconscious mind, there's a lot more going on in there than we even have really the neurological capability of understanding all at once. So, it's just it's like the ebb and flow of a shoreline. And there is some evolutionary psychology to suggest, like the work of Julian Jaynes and others, that during our adaptation process, these unconscious motives, which were reflected by the imagination, that actually came across as embodied voices to ancient humans. Yeah, and there's a very real possibility of that. So, and if that were the case, you could see how dreams would take on such an important role. And dreams almost seem anomalous to the material scientist because, it's just essentially, according to them, some random neurological feedback of maybe the most impressionable parts of your day. But even that, or maybe wish fulfillment, as Freud would put it. But all that is a little bit true, but it doesn't really sum it up. And what's really going on here is this. All of those things, including this you know, what Jung would essentially say, this tether into the reservoir, the collective unconscious, something that we share through symbols, archetypes, and memes, culture, and society as we know it. And dreams to many excuse me, to many esotericists, and especially evolutionary psychologists, are the cornerstone of this.
Yeah.
And so for me, in my experiences, it started with dreams, in a recurring dream where someone I knew was leading me. What ultimately equated to the divine feminine in the long run. It was actually an ex-girlfriend that I still get along with just fine. She's a saint, and in the dream, she was. You know, I would go through all different places, like a Jack Nicholson, you know, Shining style hedge maze,
Yeah.
or like floating in space. The running motif was me being stranded on like a makeshift raft in the endless ocean, and her being like a siren, a mermaid, and and I I kept having these experiences, and they were, you know, our relationship was important, but it was over for sure. And we had both gone on to do other things with our lives, but there was this nagging unconscious mechanism that I couldn't put my finger on, and that kept drawing me back to this thing, to this woman. And so the best thing I could
The girlfriend.
surmise,
That,
the
okay.
ex, yeah. So the you know, the only thing I could surmise really was that this was like an unconscious metaphor for something. It was an allegory unfolding, but I couldn't. I just it took time to unravel the whole thing. And so you start working with dreams, and you know, there's an old saying that says if you make eye contact with something in a dream, it tends to denote sentience on the other side of those eyes. Because if you think about it, you often hardly ever really make eye contact with things in dreams.
Damn, I didn't even think about that.
So I definitely think, you know, let me put it this way. I keep things fairly open-ended in terms of my research. I have my personal beliefs, which I'm happy to share. I think that there is other sentience in dreams.
I was going to ask you that. I swear to God, the first break, I was going to say, do you think that the characters in your dreams are sentient? Because they say some stuff, man, and you're like, that didn't come from my brain. Like,
yeah,
I don't think thoughts like that. Where the hell is that coming from? You know, that stuff happens all the time.
And see, I'll say this as well. I forgot to mention an interesting piece to the puzzle. The first ever dream I had, this whole teasing chase kind of thing, I actually had months before I met the woman. I dreamt of her face and everything. And
holy hell, man, that's happened to me before too. I swear to God.
Right, it's actually a fairly common thing, you know. Like people can naysay and doubt all they want, but when you talk to the average person, yeah, dreams are very, very anomalous and hard to put your finger on. But it definitely very clearly seems that our brain is engaging in this projection process, projecting these mechanisms, whether they be biological instincts or like psychological ideals in our brains. But if we're following along this scientific trail of thought with these projections, I definitely think that it's entirely possible. And like I said, I do think this happens. I think that in a sense, things puppeteer those things. You know, you project, like in my case of a dream, I project the face of a woman that I know, but it doesn't have much to do with her really. And see, so let's carry this out a little further in terms of sentience in my specific case. This ultimately led me down the path exploring, you know, the polarity and the process of individuation that Jung talked about, and that's, you know, the whole marriage of opposites, the alchemical psychological marriage, and you know, so I started to realize that this was very clearly a message. This was the embodiment of my anima, you know, the feminine aspect of my psyche, and it was being obfuscated by the shadow. The song of the siren. It's a very interesting motif. because it's so beautiful and illustrious. But if you don't do what Odysseus did and essentially tie yourself to the mast and hope for the best, then your impulses are going to take over. You're going to fly overboard because, and that's the problem with following your bliss. Oftentimes, don't get me wrong, it's good to have bliss as an end goal. Definitely looking for peace. Everyone wants to be happy, but sometimes you got to get dirty, and that doesn't mean screwing anybody over or yourself. That just means doing the hard work and engaging. Don't go chasing dragons unless you're prepared to slay them, so to speak. So when you start engaging with the shadow, this kind of but let's get into that next. To answer your question more directly, ultimately, not only the dreams, but I ended up engaging. I looked more into hypnosis and these altered states of consciousness, and I decided to perform some ritual and ceremony to, respectively, the mother, the father, and the logos. Logos being the persona, so to speak. You could argue, the
all creating symbol creator. Yeah, right.
What's that?
The all creator, the symbol creator, the grand architect, logos type thing.
Right. Yeah. So the mother and father being essentially the cornerstones of existence, the existence of this polarity that is defined by by the world around us and our own psyches. And and when you're engaging in this type of hypnotic activity, there are people who there are lots of different ways to do this. I needed a more direct approach. The dreams were and my art, the things that I was doing in my life to try and suss this stuff out, it was productive, but it was not enough. And I don't just, I try to use Occam's razor whenever possible. I try to find the most rational, logical approach to things. So I'm not just, it doesn't just work for me to, don't get me wrong. If this works for you, that's perfect. Some people,
it's all right. Don't worry about what people think, man. Say what's up. What? How did you do it?
Yeah.
Who
Well,
cares?
It's sitting down and let's see. The only point I wanted to make there was a lot of people tend to dogmatize this, and you've got to go through certain steps. And I don't necessarily see it that way. You do have to go through certain steps. There's a psychological priming process involved here, but it could be different for each person.
Right.
And this is where I kind of look at chaos theory and what they would call chaos magic more so than any particular tradition, so to speak, because I think
chaos magic's all about just using what works, basically.
Right.
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah, you hit the nail on the head, and no need to say more. Yeah, absolutely. So for me, I look to tradition, but I find the things that best facilitate my own personal process. So when I'm sitting down, I do some cleansing. I'll burn some sage, and this is this is psychological priming. So do I think that some of this stuff, it's hard to say where the value is, but here's the thing: is when you're going through these certain steps and processes, you're activating. It's kind of like in Inception, where they had kicks that let them sneak through the levels of the dreams. You're doing that in a reverse process. You're kicking yourself in deeper. So you find what works for you. You burn some sage. You say some prayers and hymns. You do a lesser banishing pentagram ritual. You find and these gods and goddesses, ultimately, when you look at them throughout history, demonstrably what they are, if nothing else, are states of consciousness.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, there could definitely be more to it, but at the very least, it's that. So you're calibrating yourself. The brain is dishing out hertz waves just like a radio. So you're tuning yourself very literally through these hypnotic mechanisms. You burn the type of incense you want. You say the prayers and hymns, and you let yourself fall into a state of suspended disbelief, essentially, because as far as I'm concerned, everybody can do this. You know, you could be a skeptic and do this, but what you can't do is be a skeptic in the moment, you know, because that's not how the hypnotic mechanisms work. You have to let yourself be drawn in deeper and deeper. You're going on the dive deeper into the psyche. And, you know, I encourage people to be as skeptical as they would like to be with, you know, my story or
you're preaching to the choir.
process.
I got a whole temple back here behind the studio with pillars and everything. So, I mean, I'll do ceremonies sometimes where I'll light that whole thing up full of candles. I mean, it'll look like a cathedral in there. So, yeah, I'm not concerned with. I used to be concerned with what everybody thought and if they were going to follow my motif or whatever, but not anymore, man. Like, I'm just concerned about getting there. That's it, you know?
Right. Yeah, absolutely. But see, people tend to sometimes, and there's nothing you can really do about it in the long run as an individual, but some people will shy away from this stuff because of superstition and dogma, etc. And you know, because a lot of times people they look at all this allegory and metaphor and symbols and like, where's the tangibility? It's like, well, the tangibility is in your neurology. It's in your brain. It's in your body. It's not just in your brain, but, you know, these experiences, whether it's like sleep paralysis or these visionary epileptic seizures or dreams or art. I mean, it's something that is catalyzing an experience within you. And that's kind of the whole, again, going back to the like state of suspended disbelief you have to get into for these hypnotic ceremonies. Think about it like this. That happens already when you experience all this other unexplainable phenomena, whether you want to call it metaphysical or crypto or UFO. I mean, anybody, unless you're, I don't know, I mean, there are some people who are all in, but most people, even if
I'm all in.
Well, all I mean is with the personal experience.
Dude, I'll put a robe on and put war paint on my face and start chanting stuff to Temples of Doom. I don't care. If it works, I'll do it. You know? Like, if you got to pass a state, if you got to get through a certain state that's blocking you from growth, I mean, whatever. Like, I'm not saying, like, go out and start sacrificing animals, but, you know, like, get there.
Right, yeah. You got to be prepared to do the dirty work sometimes.
Yeah.
There's a quote by the 33rd degree Freemason, Manly P. Hall, that goes along the lines of labor is the gift from nature and existence itself. And through labor, we learn all things. And you can take labor in the grandest scheme of the word. It doesn't necessarily imply a day job, although it certainly can. But, you know, the labor of love, the labor of art, the labor of existence in general. So sometimes you have to engage in certain processes in order to instigate. That's why people do ceremony and prayer. You know, people get squeamish sometimes. You talk about ceremony and ritual, but everybody does it. You know, you wake up and you have a cup of coffee in the morning, you're engaging in ceremony and ritual. It's a fundamental mechanism of our existence and the way we live our lives. And when you're participating, when you're participating in this sort of hypnotic, mystical, esoteric, whatever you want to call it, religious experience, you're just trying to pinpoint that more. You know, you're tuning in to a more direct frequency because, again, going back to some of the stuff we opened up with, there are certain aspects of our personality, our mentality, our individual existence that are not met by our physical existence, and that creates this sort of phantom limb process that we have going on in the brain. Because, as far as I'm concerned, the evidence certainly shows that is not just specified to phantom limb syndrome or sleep paralysis. I mean, that's a fundamental process of the psyche. We project things in order to identify trauma.
You know what's trippy is I think about that phantom limb thing, right? And from what they've studied about the brain, and I could be wrong about this, but it's just nerves firing, right? So it's just nerves firing, and that's how we do all this stuff. But they really haven't figured out, like they know what parts control what, but I don't think they figured out how we do all this stuff, right? Like when I snap my finger, how do I, they don't know, like, and it's consciousness doing that. It's that ethereal body, that consciousness inside you that's in this vehicle that's doing that. That's what I believe. But these neurologists, they say one thing and then they come out with something else. And it's like, you don't know. You guys don't know because you keep saying this different things all the time, you know?
Yeah, that's where scholars start to get tedious and tiresome. They're squabbling over the semantics of all these definitions. You know, like the schism in today's brain sciences and psychoanalysis, really, among other things, is the whole free will debate. Because, you know, the more you look into these things, as far as I'm concerned, the real, you know, the truest psychologist or neuroscientist plays devil's advocate and admits the fact that we don't fully understand these things, and that, you know, who knows where this trail of breadcrumbs starts exactly, and there's a good chance that it really doesn't have a definable start to begin with.
And the void, right? The void is this, right?
Sure.
What is consciousness? It always has been. What is consciousness? Okay, what happens after we die, and what is force? Like, these people don't know any. They make names for all this stuff, but they don't know really what it is. You know, metaphysics, I believe, is the only thing that's going to answer it. Consciousness exploration, scientific experiment through conscious exploration, that kind of thing. You know, we'll figure it out there.
It can be done. You know, the people think of the imagination and they think, I don't know, this sort of like loose, abstract, wishy-washy kind. I don't. They don't think of it as like oftentimes as a constructive template, something that is an active tool for your brain. And, you know, the symbols in a very direct way operate with the imagination, the way that you know, numerical digits operate in an algorithm. So there are ways to begin to identify these things more, and people are doing it more and more. But we're still at the infantile stage in our understanding of consciousness, for sure. And okay, so let's tie this up a little bit. Talking about consciousness and whether or not things are sentient in these projection processes and things. So I sit down and say prayers and hymns to the Divine Mother, and, you know, because I have a appreciation for Christianity, as I mentioned, you know, along with other philosophies and ideologies as well. But such a huge disservice rather, that's done by the Abrahamic religions is this kind of just like, you know, shoo the divine feminine into a corner type thing. Like with Christianity, you shoehorn in Mary, and it's just, it doesn't cut it, in my opinion. You know, it's a travesty done to the balance of not only metaphysical philosophy and doctrine, but like I've been saying, our existence as we know it. And so I sit down with the Divine Mother before I communicate with the Divine Father or the Logos in ceremonies after this. And I just, you know, I after a little bit, you know, in my personal experience, you start to feel your eyes involuntarily start to, you know, become very rapid, like you're in REM sleep or something. And you kind of, as the more you slip into the hypnotic state, especially saying the prayers and hymns, you know, repetition, drawing yourself in, you get to a point where you're basically in a dream for all intents and purposes. You know, your body is no longer, it's a non-factor, and you slip into this state of consciousness where things just start coming at you. And because you primed yourself with all this preparation and study, naturally, because this is just how the brain works, all those things that you were intaking right before this process is going to be on the front of your brain. And then you just, in this state of suspended disbelief, you just let the things come as they are, and you'd be surprised at what comes.
Yeah, yeah, right. Like it's a whirlwind of crazy stuff that's coming. And you hear Eckhart Tolle in your head going, if you have a thought, just let it come in and let it pass. And you're like, I got a bunch of them. Like, I gotta let them all go. And then there's like, pranayama and asana that Aleister Crowley talked about, where you'd sit in a God form, and he wanted you to sit there in that God form just to show you that you can't hold still because your brain's just going crazy all the time, to try to get you just to hold still for a second and see how long you could do that without scratching your nose or blinking or twitching, right? And you start realizing, man, my brain is going crazy all the time, right? I got to get it to relax. And so,
mine too, man, believe me.
Yeah. So like, that's where I think where trance has helped me, mantra and trance, or even like putting on certain types of house music or trance music. And if somebody, and it's weird, you got to do this stuff in private, right? Because if somebody actually walked in my temple when I was doing that, they'd see these plumes of smoke and my eyes just really big, like crazy looking, just sitting there like doing trance. But, but when you're by yourself, you don't got to worry about anybody looking at you. But you can finally, like, level out. There's a place you can get and level out. I get. It's hard to get there sometimes, for sure, but yeah.
Mm-hmm. And oftentimes it's like putting in reps at the gym. And that's why there are different levels to it as well. There's prayer, and then there's the full blown ritualized ceremony. And for me, it was a very intense, relieving experience. I learned all sorts of different things, and some things, I will say this: it's important to know it's important to understand the projection process and the nature of symbols, because when you're speaking to your imagination, to the unconscious mind, essentially, it's going to answer in these allegories and metaphors. So it's not necessarily literal either.
Right.
But so if for me, there are different examples or like case studies that you could look into in investigating this whole sentience question. But when you're talking about what I consider the Holy Trinity, so to speak, the Mother, the Father, and the Logos, these things I think are, they're the cornerstone of our psychological existence, and they're projected throughout our culture as we know it. So, it's like quasi-sentience at the very least, because it's affected us to such a deep intrinsic degree, and this kind of gets into like mimetic viruses and
what?
Are you how familiar are you with mimetics?
Not at all. Is that you talking about Maimonides? Is that where the word mimetics comes from, or what?
The meme, essentially.
Oh, I got you. Okay. Well, look, we're at the top of the hour. I want to hear about this, though. Memes. This is a chaos magic thing, isn't it?
Yeah, in
Cool.
many ways, yeah.
Yeah, I want to talk about this for sure. We're at the top of the hour. We're with Anthony Tyler. It's Lighting the Void live on the Fringe FM. We'll be right back.
Hi, I'm Alex Exum, and you're listening to The Fringe FM.
Are you intrigued by paranormal talk radio? You'll love the new paranormal radio app from TalkStream Live. You'll find a great selection of talk shows covering UFOs, ghosts, strange phenomena, and much more. Download the Paranormal Radio app now and start listening to the very best in paranormal talk entertainment, including the network you're listening to right now, the Paranormal Radio app. Free in Google Play and the iOS App Store.
Hey, this is No Way Jose, a Northern California Piscean stuck in the Arizona desert. I'm a void walker, and I got the shoes to prove it. So what do I do when my soul yearns to delve deep into the realm of the unknown? I aim my satellite straight into the night sky and catch a smooth ride on the KTLK-DB radio waves. I tune into Lighting the Void with Joe Root on the Fringe FM.
Joe, Lighting the Void is the best show on the planet. This is Barney, your friend from Facebook. Thank you and all the crew for all you do. Namaste, my friend.
This is Macon from the foothills of North Carolina, and I am a void walker.
G'day, void walkers. This is Lily from down under Australia. The world may be small, the enigma is greater. So let your curiosity take you for a journey with Joe Root.
Hey, this is V, coming in from Central Maryland, and I am a void walker.
This is Kevin Doherty, a beginner void walker. I'm from Vancouver, BC. I know a little about a lot, and as Leonard Skinner said, I guess the rest. I learned a lot from Mr. Root in the show, and I heard it from the beginning. I knew right then he was going to be a new Art Bell. Thanks for all your shows, and keep it up.
Hey, this is Derek from Mass, a.k.a. the Night Stalker, and I'm a void walker.
This is Mark from Chicago, and I walk the void to ascertain what is consciousness.
My name is Jared Johnson, and I'm from Humboldt County, California. I do not know all the answers to the questions about reality. I do not claim to know the ultimate truth about life. I seek that which has been made hidden as a part of a family of explorers of consciousness. I'm a void walker. Thanks, Joe Root.
I'm Clyde Lewis. You are listening to The Fringe FM.
Hey, is that a new music app?
Yeah, check it out. Surfer Music Discovery. It links to thousands of online stations, but the twist is you see the song names and artists that are now playing live.
That's different. No guessing. Looks like a waterfall of music.
So many formats. Rock, oldies, country, R&B, jazz, and a whole lot more.
How's that spelled?
Surfer. S-U-R-F-R.
Is it expensive?
It's free. No need to sign up or sign in.
Get the Surfer Music app free from Google Play or the App Store.
Have you ever seen an ad or banner which brought you a feeling that someone is reading your mind or even listening to your conversations? Your online data is being used against you. Surfshark is a VPN service that makes online privacy protection easy and attainable. You can use it on as many devices as you'd like simultaneously. Surfshark encrypts all internet traffic sent to and from your devices and ensures that your IP address remains hidden. The VPN service that we use at UFO Seekers plus 1 month free for $1.99 a month. Visit surfshark.deals/seekers.
We all have that story to tell in our lives. The winds were howling. The ground shook. You could hear rushing water. And then history repeats itself. When there's no power, refrigeration fails. Stores with their shelves strip bare. ATMs can't operate. Deliveries stop. Then what? These events can last days or weeks. You need a plan. In statements made during recent interviews, FEMA Administrator Brock Long has repeatedly urged all Americans to understand 3 truths. FEMA is broke. The system is broken. If this is the new normal, Americans can't rely on federal cavalry when disaster strikes. Don't get caught out in the elements empty-handed. Prepare with us by going to preparewiththefringe.com and get your 2-week food supply. 92 servings, 8 food varieties with 25-year shelf life. Normally $137, now only $75. Or get a month's supply, normally $247, now only $147 shipped in 1 business day. Just go to preparewiththefringe.com or call 888-440-7931. That's 888-440-7931. Get this great offer and be prepared while it lasts.
Grammar lessons for today's show was provided by old Mrs. O'Malley, who have been teaching we local citizens how to talk good for more longer than 13 years.
Hey, Fringe listeners, this is Dave Cruz, host of Beyond the Strange Radio, asking you to join us live Sunday evenings at 7 p.m. Pacific Time, 10 p.m. Eastern, right here on the Fringe FM. Visit beyondthestrange.com for links to chat, social media, and schedules of the show. And remember, always stay strange. Hasta.
This portion of the show is being brought to you by Ed's House of Bad Food, inviting you to come in and try Ed's famous $1.98 all-you-can-stomach salad bar.
Paranormal News, I'm Brad Bernards. On July 14th, 2015, a small shimmering spacecraft was the first to explore Pluto and probe at the icy objects of the Kuiper Belt, according to reporting at Inverse.com. Data from that rare encounter during NASA's New Horizons mission may have just rewritten the origin story of the most popular dwarf planet. Astronomers have long believed that Pluto started off as an icy cold rock in the Kuiper Belt and hit a subsurface ocean when it first formed.
Researchers believe the planet
formed rapidly, helping to develop the planet's ocean. Now Pluto's ocean is contained by a thick ice shell and maintained by radioactive decay at the planet's core.
Today, Pluto is a freezing cold world with a surface temperature of about 45 Kelvin or minus 380 degrees Fahrenheit. Archaeologists have discovered the markings of a prehistoric structure, an ancient monument positioned just 1.9 miles northeast of Stonehenge, according to a study published Sunday in the journal Internet Archaeology, according to UPI.
These are 20-meter diameter, at least 5-meter deep, sometimes even deeper, we think, shafts or pits that have been dug into the chalk and are oriented in a kind of an arc both to the south and the north of Durrington walls. The orientation of them, the spacing of them, would suggest that they have some organized sort of ritualistic reason for being there.
Dr. Richard Bates, senior lecturer in earth sciences at the University of St. Andrews Center for Archaeology, Technology, and Cultural Heritage. That's courtesy of Reuters. Connect with the news at parabnormalradio.com. I'm Brad Bernards, Parabnormal News.
Somewhere between abnormal and paranormal, there's a show called Into the Paranormal. I'm Jeremy Scott. Hear me live Saturdays at 6 p.m. Pacific, 9 Eastern on the Fringe FM.
Message is being broadcast by the Department of Defense of the Republic. At 2 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, multiple unidentified objects were confirmed to have entered Earth's atmosphere.
Discovery Houston, 20 seconds to LOS speed rescue. Contact, I am in orbit.
The first message that comes to you is you are a divine being. You matter. You count. You come from realms of unimaginable power and light, and you will return to those realms.
The vast stretches of the unknown and the unanswered and the unfinished still far outstrip our collective comprehension.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Broadcasting from Forest Tower Studios, all the way from the Deep South. Now, here is your host, Joe Root.
And welcome back to Lighting the Void. I'm your host, Joe Root. Don't forget you can join the Fringe FM chat room by going to thefringe.fm/chat room. If you like this show, please sign up to our Patreon at lightingthevoid.com. Click on the Patreon banner or go to patreon.com/LTV radio, where you can get access to all of our cool stuff behind the scenes, outside the shack, the astrological stuff, the tarot stuff, the astral travel journal. There's no stuff. I'm just getting mumbled up. There's so much stuff in there. Tonight our guest is Anthony Tyler, author, pretty cool dude, author of The Dive. Is that the name of it? The Dive? Did I get it right? Dive Manual. Empirical Manual. Investigations in Mysticism. Yeah. Empirical Investigations in Mysticism. Look, I'm not playing when I tell you, man, the best times I've ever had, and I know people are laughing at it, but the best times I've ever had as far as consciousness exploration, full garb, full candles, like face paint down to the wazoo, like get into it. You know, here's the thing. Why? Because I feel like what you were talking about earlier, there's this thing with ritual when you get involved. You're talking about these two forces, right? Like the male and female force. Well, those two forces, you can do that in ceremony, right? So when you get into your emotion, whether it's acting, vibrating, gallivanting around, walking in a circle or whatever, doing the play part of it, but that's the female force, right? And all of and the direct force or the direct symbols and stuff that you lay down is like the male force. So you got force and you got form. Always force and form. Just like when we manifest stuff, we visualize it, but that's just kind of like the force or the logos. But if you don't have the acting out, and if you don't have the emotion to go with it, it doesn't give it the broadcast. You know what I mean?
Absolutely. Yeah. There's a scholarly definition to describe exactly what you just said, and this whole idea of psychodrama. It's in any sort of like rites of initiation into societies, Freemasonry, or even the like the Eleusinian mysteries, or the mysteries of the pyramid priests. It's a psychodrama. You're engaging and enacting in these things specifically because they engage. It's essentially, it's an easy metaphor to say it's like not wanting to go to the gym, and then you go to the gym anyway, and then you're usually glad that you did. Like, at least I'm getting a pump on. I feel it in my brain. I'm feeling good. So let's get into memes a little bit, and the difference between memes and archetypes, and then there's some interesting stuff we could talk about in terms of like all this projection stuff and angels and demons, etc. So archetypes. And also, just to put a bow on what we were just talking about, if listeners want other terms just to relate to masculine and feminine, masculine being active and feminine being passive, these are forces of nature. They're not sexual orientation. Those are derivatives. The sexual orientation is so far down the scale when you're talking about like symbolic correlations to these things ultimately. So in any case, memes. Archetypes are biological indicators, or they're symbolic indicators of biological drives and instincts, essentially, that manifest in our psyches. And memes are how we communicate those symbols to each other. The symbols themselves, the communication of those things coming outside of our brain and being exchanged through our culture and society and ritual and ceremony, etc. And Richard Dawkins, author of The Selfish Gene and the God Delusion, he was the first one to talk about memes as this, essentially, quite literally, he proposed as a psychological unit of like the evolutionary scale, similar to genes of the physical body. And this would interrelate to mirror neurons in V.S. Ramachandran's work. And he talks about how mirror neurons are it's like the lighting the powder keg of human culture and society. Once we start to reflect those adaptations, it becomes a snowball effect. Without that stuff, without these parts of the brain, we don't have the capability to experience any of this stuff. So in terms of memes, it's constituted as like a psychological virus. That could be good and bad. It encompasses folklore, culture, and society, religion, all of it as we know it. And biologically, it's the same. So many viruses are bad, but there are viruses that have contributed to our adaptation process and have evolved alongside humanity. But being infected with a meme virus, it's so simple as me telling you not to think of pink elephants, and then you're going to be thinking of pink elephants, at least for a second, inevitably. Yeah. And congratulations, I just infected you with a virus, harmless as it may be.
Don't think of COVID-19. There you go.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So it's our brains are hardwired for this stuff innately, and so from there, if you're looking for more data to sink your teeth into, that's why I've looked into biological mechanisms, like epilepsy throughout history, throughout civilization, and sleep paralysis, as well as dreams, and the history of psychedelics and these things. All these things that people, not only throughout history, have people associated these things with spiritualism as we know it, comparative religion, all of it. But when you look at the historical record, the anthropological record, these things are the cornerstones. Like surprisingly, like sleep paralysis and epilepsy are so intrinsic to the instigation of a lot of these ideas throughout history as we know it. And there are so many great minds throughout history that have had epilepsy, and likely temporal lobe epilepsy. Now, this is a fascinating piece of information, and this shows you that what I'm about to get into, because even if you are following a trail of just biology and psychology, essentially, and how it relates to the imagination, when you follow that trail and just use Occam's razor, you see that the trail goes much further than we can really comprehend. So take temporal lobe epilepsy. There, like I said, great minds throughout history. There's some dispute as to who specifically, but there's names tossed around like Dante, writer of the Divine Comedy, Tolstoy, Dostoevsky definitely had epilepsy. A lot of others, especially metaphysically inclined people. Now, on the opposite end of that spectrum, you have the classical case of possession that happened in the 1970s in Germany of Anneliese Michel. I don't know if you're familiar with this case at all, but it's the most well documented, one of the most well documented cases of quote unquote possession and exorcism that we've ever come across. And it was the basis for the movie The Exorcism of Emily Rose. And this, it's very interesting for many different reasons, but especially because before her parents got into, before they started getting down the full-blown exorcism rites route, they're bringing her to specialists and doctors and verifying over and over again that all she was experiencing was this epilepsy. There's no psychosis involved. Yeah, and she started to have these visions. She would sometimes have very positive theological visions of like Mother Mary and other things, but it was continuing. So because in this temporal lobe process, there's clearly some sort of hijack of the mirror neurons happening in one way or another. And when you're engaging in this projection process, it's very hard even for a disciplined person to have the reins of it all the time. So naturally, this girl, in her early 20s, she's having negative sight and vision in her seizures as well. And because she's in such a religious environment, those naturally become demonic. And again, like similar to UFOs, I think that there is a reality to this. I just don't know. The state of suggestibility is so it's present. So it just lends to the idea that we have to participate in these things to some degree with our projection process in order for them to manifest to begin with.
Yeah, and we talk about all this stuff as if we actually know what it is and put definitions on it, and this is this kind of ship and this is this kind of alien and this is this kind of experience, but is it really like
right? Yeah. See, I am while I remain I keep a healthy skepticism, I am an advocate for an experiencer of any variety, really. I mean, if you're coming at me with being genuine and full of wonder, and you don't fully know what happened, you think it's this, but like I am definitely an advocate for that. But I think it's very healthy and important to just you don't have to deny your experience by any stretch of the imagination. Just be open to knowing that you will not necessarily know.
You could be wrong. Why is that such a hard concept? Like you could be wrong, right? Yeah.
And in other, we were talking about temporal lobe epilepsy and visions of the divine or demonic. So that case of Anneliese Michel, very, very interesting. There are like audio tapes of her recorded online, and she basically, not in the audio tapes, but she, throughout the whole process, it went on for like 2 years, like 8 hours a week or something, the exorcism rites. Yeah. And
God
yeah, she exhibited all of the classical symptoms reportedly, and there were many, many eyewitnesses, all except levitation, but everything else, the knowing the hidden languages. She was apparently speaking like Chinese and Latin. in different times, and having like the telepathy of people's innermost guilt and these kinds of things, like extreme strength, etc. And she eventually died because she was telling she it came across, we'll never really know for sure because this gets into the reality of the psyche, but it seems as if the demon was starving her, from reports. Like she could only eat at certain times, and sometimes when she was eating, it would be like a time limit went off in her head and she had to spit out the food and the demon wouldn't let her anymore.
What are your thoughts on, just real quick before I forget, what are your thoughts on psychic attack? Because I feel like that really does happen to people. Seriously. And especially so. when I see, like I can defend it myself, but what do you do for somebody else? You know, like, you know what I mean? Like if it's real and you see it happening, how could they watch this girl go through all this stuff? Clearly, this exorcism is not working. I would say after a certain amount of time, I don't care what your belief is, somebody's going to have to step in and help this girl. But that didn't really happen.
No, it did not. And it's a huge travesty. The priests involved in the long run, while I think they had good intentions, they was definitely not handled properly, and they were charged with manslaughter. And they didn't go to jail, but they served like 3 years of probation. So it was a whole court case about it, and it really speaks to I'll get in next to what I think is potentially going on there. But other interesting notes is when you look into serial killers, I definitely have a true crime fascination as well. And serial killers, not only so many of them have like the really traumatic bumps on the head as children, but there are plenty of cases of prolific serial killers with epilepsy, and in some cases temporal lobe epilepsy, like lo and behold Richard Ramirez, the Night Stalker guy, super into Satan. You can't find someone more into Satan than Ramirez, and that guy was experiencing these temporal lobe visions. There's another one, I can't remember his nickname, but Arthur Shawcross. No, I don't want to say it in case it's wrong. But a prolific killer in New York, and that guy not only had temporal lobe epilepsy, he had a cyst on his temporal lobe, and that guy was brutal, absolutely brutal. Guess who also had epilepsy? Although I can't seem to find any verification on what kind specifically. Was Son of Sam, David Berkowitz. Mm-hmm. That guy thought that demons were possessing his neighbor and the neighbor's dogs and all this stuff, and you know, you can argue, you could say, well, like, some of these people's fascination might be like heightened, like after incarceration, like telling stories of grandeur and stuff. But these people have documented histories, and they're prolific killers, so they've been investigated heavily, especially after capture.
Yeah. And you don't know what their environments were truly like, right? What somebody's environment, upbringing, all that stuff can actually do to their mind is incredible. Yeah. It's incredible. And you don't know what it's like because it's years and years of stuff usually, right? And if they have that on top of that stuff, man, yeah.
Right, absolutely. Yeah, and you can when you talk to the people in the lives of these serial killers, their family members and stuff, like there's a point where Richard Ramirez went to California from Texas, and a family member actually comes out to look for him because they're worried about him. And he's like, don't worry. He's like, I'm not coming back home. I'm under the protection of Lucifer. You know, it's all going to be good from here. Yeah. So these people were definitely, you know, it wasn't just hype around their stories, like the cases I gave. Oh, also John Wayne Gacy, definite epileptic. So, and not super into Satan overtly, but definitely into different personalities and symbols, most certainly. So, you know, what's going on here, though? We've already talked about sentience and free will a little bit. I think that that's enough in that regard for a listener to chew on. But like, what kind of state is a person getting to if there is a case of possession? Like, for instance, do I think that exorcism would work on Richard Ramirez? Like, of course not. No.
Well, hold on. Do you believe in the collective unconscious, or the theory of the collective unconscious? Right? Do you believe in that?
Sure.
So if you believe in that, then people with certain mental, mental acquisitions or whatever that we don't have, abnormal things like temporal lobe epilepsy, they could pick up on, maybe they're more prone to pick up on things that are in the collective unconscious that we tend to ignore, or we tend to just not hear,
I think there's something to that. Yeah,
we don't know, but I mean, if the collective unconscious is real and these people have this in common, their brains overstimulated and activated in some sense, and they're turning evil. They're hearing voices. Are they tapping into the collective unconscious? Like, if you could actually listen to everybody's thoughts at once, the kind of shit you would hear, man. Think about it.
Yeah, no, real talk for sure. And I mean, the collective consciousness is such a tenable theory. The only real question is how deep it goes. But the fact that there is a sort of network between us all that draws from the same archetypal influences, and that's definitely a given. So I'm not saying that these exorcism rites couldn't work on Ramirez or anyone else, and they very well could. But what seems to be going on, and you could take this, you could transpose this to religion in general, even cryptozoology and ufology. This is just the cornerstone of people's belief systems. But Jung talked about, the idea of transference, the projection process, this mutual exchange process between a patient and the therapist, where it was essentially a familial, unconscious, like implicit relationship, where there's a state of, like familial safety, and that if you don't instigate that process and allow that to take hold, then you're not going to get the fullest extent of the therapy or be able to help a patient to the fullest extent. And it seems to be the same with an exorcism. Annalise Michel was a devout Catholic, and so was her family, and they were definitely willing to take what these priests said into account. So they made this unconscious psychological agreement between themselves, and and so whether or not you need that agreement to engage in a process such as an exorcism, it definitely helps. It's definitely going to magnify it tremendously. Again, we're talking about priming. Everything we talked about with ritual and ceremony, it applies very literally here.
Yeah, I mean, subconsciously, she might have needed it, but to go on and on and on and on and on without the science, without the medicine, without real help and rest and nutrition, it's crazy. It's not rational,
No, it's an absolute travesty. And this one of the reasons that her case is so fascinating is it really brings us to the crux of the cornerstone, the $5 million question of demonology in our modern society is if there is such a thing as just this utmost negative presence, like the opposite of a mystical experience where you feel this state of connection and oneness. Instead, you're devolving into this state of animalistic aggression, etc.
It's like individuality, but it's less than that. It's almost like you're going into a dark hole or something.
It's a total fracturing of the psyche. You're just being shattered like a glass mirror.
Defracturing, that's crazy.
Yeah, but let's see, what was I going to say? Oh yeah, this really speaks to the difference between like illness and disease. Disease being the physical ailments, the things you can trace in the body, and illness being a person's not only psychological but the response, essentially the psychological response, their attitudes towards the disease and how their attitudes will affect their body, like in combination with the disease. And when you look at cases of possession, pretty much without question are there's always mental illness involved, but there seems to be an apex of mental illness where there's a combination of factors. You know, you may have someone with temporal lobe epilepsy who is also experiencing sleep paralysis and also having some pretty disturbing dreams. You know, the list could go on, and then all these contributing factors lead to a breaking point.
Let me tell you something, man. What you're saying right there is, I never told this story, but a long time ago, I had a listener that got into psychic protection, right? And they would constantly message me, man, I feel like I'm under attack, or I have to protect myself. I saged the house. I got 12 bracelets on. I did this. I did that. And I was like, whoa, listen to yourself. Like, you've done every protection thing in the book. All right. So where's this really coming from? And they're freaking screaming at me. And I said, listen, and this was before I had like a bigger audience. So I had like people that I would actually talk to and try to help. I had to get, and this, you were talking about this in dreams earlier, right? The eye contact thing. I had to get this person on Skype, and I had to say, hey, and clap my hands real loud and look at me in my eye. You're like, nothing's after you. Nothing. Just keep looking. And it's, for some reason, when they locked into my eyes, it was the only moment I saw peace with them. And I thought, it registered to me what you were saying earlier about that. Like, you meet things, if you meet a being in a dream, you lock eyes with it, then is it sentient? Is it you, or is it another being, right? Like, I saw this in football too. Like, it used to trip me out. Like this, we had to, just real quick, man, I got to tell you, because all this stuff is registering to me now. This kid named Kenny, when I was in the 4th grade, he used to just freak out, man, and say, like, nobody loves me and everybody hates me. He would take off running out of the classroom. You know, he got paddled a lot. He was like one of those kids that got in trouble a lot. And it would take the coach to come out of the office to come around and grab him and pretty much kind of shake him and get him to look at him. Look at me. He'd say, look at me, Kenny. Right? And when Kenny looked at him, that's when everything stopped. Like, he could get him to stop just by looking at him. And the more I saw this, and the more I think about what you're saying, like, there is this collective unconscious. There probably is things like moving around, and we can't really help each other until we actually connect, like really connect.
Yes.
And say, hey, man, like, this isn't you, you know? This is not real. You know what I mean?
Absolutely, man. Yeah, you hit the nail on the head, 100%. You know, we're talking about angels and demons and these things. First let me bring up this. There's a book coming out in October. Now, I don't know this guy at all, so this isn't like promotion. This was just genuine curiosity. There's a psychiatrist named Dr. Richard Gallagher. He's an Ivy League psychiatrist, and he's worked with the Catholic Church for like the last 2 decades or so. In collaboration with them, they come to him when they have a case that they cannot vet out, that is challenging their understanding, and they come to him, the expert, and say, hey, man, can you find any level of specific like mental illness here? And this guy, a skeptic naturally, he says sure, and lo and behold, some of the stuff he experiences not only convinces him that there's some stuff he doesn't understand, but there's some probably malevolent stuff that he doesn't understand. And like I said, he's been working with him for the last 20 years, trying to help find the line between mental illness and possession, because possession and exorcism rites, I mean, they're as prevalent as they've ever been, especially in the West. And it's very fascinating because you'd think that with all the reason and logic we tout around as a society, that this would be considered pretty archaic at this point, but it's not. And it's still pretty relevant, in fact. What I'm curious about is we don't have all the statistics yet. And you could say that the Vatican is largely a propaganda matrix, and it is. But you take the insight of the individual priests, and you take the insight of this guy like Dr. Richard Gallagher, and you start to think like, okay, either there's a grand conspiracy going on with all these people, or they're all idiots, or there's at least something going on here. And there's definitely at least something going on here. So, and it seems
Crowley
to be
seemed to
like
think
the
so.
inversion.
The magicians seem to think so. Crowley, the Renaissance magician, they had names for these demons, what they controlled, and all of that stuff. And it seemed to work for them when they exorcised them. But is it really is that really what's going on? Or is it the fact that the mind's making a formula for it that it seems to work, and that it's worked for other people that makes it work?
Yeah, it could very well be both. That's kind of how I see it. And that kind of brings up the consideration of heuristics in evolutionary psychology. You know, this trial and error self-education method with which we've built our society and culture as we know it. And the example I always like to give, explaining what a heuristic process is and how it operates in culture, is a porcupine and its quills. So many people, even to this day, still swear that a porcupine shoots its quills at you, but it doesn't. It doesn't at all. But
that's
you know,
cartoons,
people,
right? Yeah,
right? Yeah. But honestly, you're all the better for it, more or less. I mean, if you think a porcupine shoots its quills at you, you're probably going to stay further away from it and avoid those quills a lot more thoroughly. So, in these kind of sense, in these instances, the ends justify the means. Now, sometimes that can be used as justification for some pretty heinous things, but that's why things like religion are so polarizing to begin with. But
that's also why people say, well, I'm going to do an exercise, a banishing or a cleansing. Well, what's it going to hurt? What if, even if it's not real, or it is real, at least if it is real, then I'm good. If it's not, then whatever. Yeah. Like, absolutely. I get what you're saying.
Yeah. And that's also where what I mentioned before, this state of this important state of like suspended disbelief, because even if you don't understand all this, the small minutia sometimes, if you're getting a result out of it that is tangible, that you can observe and verify, then what more do you need? You know, like that's it right there. That's your proof. So, you know, do what works for you. And, you know, since we're talking about demons,
well, wait, hold on just a second though. If somebody says, listen, I'm good at making money. Like I can do money spells and make $20,000 every time. Right. And you might see, and here's where it gets tricky. You might see what's really going on. It could just be like a probability thing, or it could just, but the fact that they believe it for some wild reason, they're hitting 9 out of 10 instead of, I don't know, 7 out of 10. Do you tell them the truth, or what you perceive to be the truth, or do you let it be? I say let it be. And this is my point about like religion and stuff. If they're not hurting people, it's their belief, and they're not hurting people, and it's helping them, then let it be. Why rag them about it?
Absolutely. I completely agree with that. And, you know, I'm definitely of the opinion, like, know thyself and, you know, do what thou will. But in the name of altruism, make sure you have other people in mind as well. You know, love is the law. Crowley was he was a nut job for sure, but he was a brilliant nut job.
His version of love might have been a little bit skewed too, in my opinion, but you know.
Oh, 100%. I'm not an advocate for Crowley at all, but for what it's worth, the dude was definitely an intellectual, but I think that the way he engaged in his personal life was pretty heinous and not recommendable. But he didn't really practice what he preached either, for that matter. He did say some interesting, pertinent things, but he never followed through with them.
A lot of magicians say, well, he reaped what he sowed as far as karma goes. Like he caused the death of his child. He caused, you know, all of his drug addictions, all of his disease, his poverty, all of these things, because he took sacred law and things that were sacred and treated them like it was just a tool for him to express love, which was actually... Have you ever heard that song by, not Slipknot, but the lead singer that talks about love is just a camouflage for what resembles rage? Essentially, essentially Crowley was just...
Snuff.
Yeah, Snuff, right?
That is a Slipknot track, but it's like one of their only acoustic ones.
Well, essentially, Crowley never really loved anybody but himself, and he was just pissed off at his upbringing, and decided to call it his own love thing. Oh, I got 40 concubines. That's love because it feels good. Like what?
Right.
What?
Yeah. Plus, Crowley was so far from a self-made man. Like you talk about power. The guy was kind of pathetic in many ways. He was a trust fund brat. He never worked a day in his life.
Yeah, yeah, but he spent it all too. So.
Yeah, he spent it all traveling around the world, fancying himself this like grand magician, just having sex and doing drugs. Like that's really what Crowley's legacy amounts to. Other than some of the interesting symbolic discourse that he did. He wrote some interesting stuff sometimes. But anyway,
you don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater. I get it.
Yeah. I mean, that's how I am in general. I try to find the value in stuff, even if most of it is garbage. There's always some sort of interesting insight you can gain from another perspective, no matter how small. But we're talking about demons and things like that. There's another concept I like to bring up to illustrate the potential gray area that becomes involved, and also it's important to relay that the shadow mechanism, the complex of the psyche, that which we do not understand but is still in our psyche, with Jung's term for it being the shadow, it's not inherently negative. It's a natural part of our psyche, and it's the thing because it's the unknown, and even if we know what we're afraid of, the implicit fear is not knowing what might happen from that thing we're afraid of. So there's always the unknown involved, in one shade or another. But a lot of the point of this stuff, the individuation process, the process of just knowing yourself on a deeper level, is reconciling with the shadow and finding a positive relationship with it. The best case scenario being Dante's guide through hell and limbo, Virgil, the Roman poet. It's very interesting because Virgil, he's considered, Dante wouldn't have been able to make those travels without him, and he's celebrated in the story itself. He's not condemned, but he's not allowed into heaven. He's stuck in limbo, and he kind of like leaves Dante at the gate and is like, there you go, man, as far as I can go. And
that sucks.
Yeah, it does suck.
Yeah, because you don't know what's on the other side of that gate. But like this dude's been helping you the whole time. I got you.
Yeah. It's a shame, man. Virgil's a dope character, and I mean a real dude too. Seemed like I'd sure like to have a drink with him. But point being, without making it really dogmatic, the takeaway there is the embodiment of the shadow, and how in a best case scenario, it might not be pure and like divine, to use those terms, but it's not an adversary. And that was one of the things I realized with the whole siren song dream motif that I was experiencing, is that it was difficult, and it was giving me a lot of existential frustration. It was creating an existential crisis in my life, essentially, but it was not my enemy. And now there are some things that are your enemy, and we talked about that a little bit with possession and stuff. Yeah. We've talked about some of the gods, some more divine aspects. This gray area is something that's not touched on enough, I feel like, in Western society, but definitely has its presence in the West, but more so in the East, from what I've seen, is the concept of the hungry ghost. And actually, I've talked to more people about this, and the hungry ghost motif is in the West, and it's quite present in Native American mythologies as well. Something that I can verify, but I'm curious about looking into even more. And the hungry ghost is this. Some people consider it the souls of deceased people, but in any case, it's some sort of spirit entity that is not demonic. It does not have evil intentions, but it's parasitic. So think about the psychological inertia in your life, good and bad. This plays into meme virus and everything else we talked about. Whether it be drug addiction or your favorite hobbies, art, all the things that you feel like were conscious decisions at one point, but now they're like incorporated into your life on a routine level. Again, like have this kind of inertia behind them. Like you could
like smoking cigarettes. for example.
Yeah, you could theoretically, but you're gonna notice the presence or the lack of presence of that thing extremely.
Right.
And yeah, so the hungry ghost, again, that could describe angels and demons as well and how they interact with us. But the hungry ghost is this thing that's like addiction, best example, where is an addict being evil by being an addict? No, certainly not inherently, not unless it's causing you or giving you instincts, needs to do terrible things. But it's certainly not a constructive mentality to be a junkie on the streets or something. So, and it's not going to help to just demonize these things and you just push it to the back corner. Like that's what so much of rehabilitation is. It's just kind of Freudian concept of shooing this thing away, putting it back under the bed, instead of this Jungian sentiment of really probing it and trying to get to the heart of the matter. What's
right.
really motivating you in emotionally and instinctually, so that you can because ultimately it's what we've been talking about this whole time, where we're projecting things that we need addressed in our mental lives that are not readily available in the physical environment. So you find buffers in many ways, whether it be art or like drugs. And
well, art's good though, right? Like, I mean, we're not relating this as good or bad, but art is a way to function in society, and in my opinion, to express like the 100%. Shadow or whatever, or to get rid of that, you know?
Yeah, I'm an artist through and through. I like to paint and draw and play music and everything. I'm definitely an advocate for art, and hell, I'm even an advocate for drugs in certain cases, certain kinds, you know, maybe a psychedelic variety, etc. But yeah, I mean, drugs can definitely be a slippery slope, and there are plenty that I don't advocate one bit. But in any case, like I said, you can't shove these things under the bed to get rid of them. You have to find, it's like the wounded child within us all, you know. You have to reconcile with these parts of your psyche in many ways, you know, and you'll know if something's nefarious, if it's causing you to wonder whether or not, like, what's real and what's not, and become paranoid and potentially delusional and ruin your relationships. You can bet your ass that you're not dealing with a hungry ghost or any sort of like lesser angel or anything like that. You're dealing with something that's screwing your head. So I mean,
it's like a bad elemental thought form that won't go away, or something like that. Yeah. Like, well, if like earlier you were talking about Dante reaching the gate, Virgil helps him reach the gate. Now, if you think about like a baby, that would be the mother with the baby, and all of a sudden the mother leaves the baby alone, right? But here's the thing. Right. If there was no mother and the baby went through the labyrinth on its own and got to the gate, it would just be another doorway. It wouldn't be nothing to that baby, right? So it would just be another doorway. It'd just be another doorway into something that the baby wants to figure out what's on the other side. And see, this is like the program that I've figured out over the years, because when you get to that unknown, when you were a child, you used to be excited about it. But because of the programs and the mentalism and everything that your parents and your friends and your peers and society and everything's programmed into you, now when you get to these unknown doors, you're like, oh shit, I can't go on the other side of that. But if you was a baby and these people, or whatever it was, wasn't there to affect you to begin with, would it really be that scary? You'd probably be excited about it, actually.
Absolutely. Yeah, very Jungian sentiment right there. Yeah. And, you know, we can get into this a little bit, just articulating good and evil a bit more. Another thing I like to bring up sometimes is the story of Faust, and, you know, Faust selling his soul to Mephistopheles. And it's often overlooked that at the beginning of Gautier's rendition of it, Mephistopheles is an angel in the court of heaven. He's basically like a Lucifer archetype, like Lucifer being pre-fall, and it's the conversation between God and Mephistopheles very much mimics the book of Job and God's like bet with Satan, or Satan's bet with God more so. And so, I mean, there's a reason he did not use the word Lucifer, Gautier. He used Mephistopheles to articulate a point, because he wasn't trying to make so much a direct a commentary on Lucifer, because that's a bit of a different topic. But the idea that there are Mephistopheles being the shadow complex, the Virgilian kind of shadow complex, but the kind of worst version of that. And so when he comes to Faust, when Mephistopheles comes to Faust, he is, for all intents and purposes, a demon. Like, he is. But it's very curious to note that that was not his origin. And it I can't say I know all of the insight behind that sentiment, but it definitely speaks to there's more than meets the eye, even the third eye. Again, like the siren song, following your bliss can be a bad thing. Sometimes taking your lumps and bruises can be a real good thing, as long as you have your ideals in mind. That's important. It's like Viktor Frankl, the famous Viennese psychiatrist who survived the Auschwitz concentration camp. He said that everything can be taken from a human being except the last of their freedoms, and it's the ability to choose their mindset in any given state, despite the given determinism. Yeah,
we forget that sometimes, man, because we get into such states of certainty or we just feel a certain way. Like, this is, like when you have anxiety, if you've ever had a panic attack and you get that impending sense of doom, and everybody's like, man, just turn it off, right? Just turn it off. Like, don't think about it. Well, it's buried in there, right? And you're like, well, you can't just not think about it. But once you start training yourself and you know the triggers of anxiety, then you could really have freedoms, right? Once you start feeling anxiety come on, the triggers before the panic attack happens, all that stuff, then you can decide at that moment, once you trained yourself, I'm not going down that road, right? Bam.
Absolutely.
That's massive power. Where somebody else is hopeless and helpless, because you've trained yourself to understand the mechanisms and what gets it there and everything in the subconscious, now you have power, you see.
Yeah, and speaking of that power, there's basic science to show, it's been done time and time again, where you regress someone in a hypnotic state. I'm not talking about like uncovering memories or anything, because that's also a different topic, but, just regressing them in a hypnotic state to memories they already have, like traumatic memories in this case, and you walk them through the steps and you suggest to them, preferably in ways that you spoke with them about before the session. You suggest to them the different mindsets and attitudes, and in many ways, because you can't delete neural branches and synapses and these things unless you have like brain damage. But what you can do is rewrite them, and you can go back and you get into the suggestive state, and you can essentially, what it boils down to, actually relive these experiences and find completely different like psychological vantage points to them. It definitely that
like you didn't go in that doorway where your abusive uncle is. You went this way, and like you walked down the room this way. You didn't even take a left. And sometimes I think the child's mind has a protective thing as a children that actually just shuts that off sometimes. Matter of fact, I know it does. Like for your own protective survival reasons, it will shut off memories. If you dig deep enough, you'll find them. Isn't that weird?
It is very strange. Yeah. The mind is that's why the unconscious mind is so aptly described as like the depth of the ocean, because it really just goes deeper and deeper, man.
Yeah, it does. In this conversation, we could probably go deeper and deeper all into the morning time, man, but we only got a few minutes left here. So tell everybody about how your book and how to get it. And since you spent this time with us, please plug away, man.
Yeah, right on. Absolutely. So yeah, I'm pretty low key. I don't have like my own website. I got a Twitter page. You could hit me up at all lowercase dive mind 667. I'm happy to have any discourse, answer any questions or anything. Definitely, if you are interested in what I have to say, I have other interviews you could check out as well. You could definitely get the book, Dive Manual, Empirical Investigations of Mysticism. You can find that on Amazon.com. You could get a digital copy or a physical copy. I'm no longer writing for The Last American Vagabond, but got nothing but very amicable. I kind of left in order to pursue these the books research more. So got nothing but good things to say about them. It was a solid. They got great intentions, and they do their due diligence with their research and journalism. So, I definitely helped build that house. So for any of your independent media needs, check out the political, nonpartisan media needs. Check out The Last American Vagabond. And yeah, I mean, that's pretty much it. Stay tuned for anybody listening for the future, because I'm definitely going to keep pumping stuff out, interviews and more material.
Well,
definitely got some written.
Well, you definitely should come back on here, because there's a whole bunch of stuff.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. We just scratched the surface of this stuff. Yeah. There's so much more we could talk about. I'd be happy to do it. Yeah, this has been a blast, honestly.
Fantastic. You guys go get the book. I'll leave whatever links I do have to the books and everything in the show notes. Big shout out to Patio for making this happen. All you guys in the Fringe FM chat, the Fringe FM team. The music was by Chronox and Steezy. Stevie, if you stay tuned after the broadcast for the Secret Teachings with Ryan Gable, please don't copy the show without written permission, especially on YouTube, and sign up to our Patreon to help support the broadcast. We'll see you guys tomorrow night, same time, same channel, right here on the Fringe FM. Good night.